The red stapler on my desk was still warm from my hand when my manager leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "You missed something again," and I stayed quiet as my stomach folded in on itself because I knew she was lying. But why did she always need me to doubt my own eyes? My name is Serafina, I was 28, and I worked as an operations analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago. When I got hired, they sold it like a dream. Fast-track team, high visibility. You'll be solving problems, not just pushing papers. On my first morning, I even bought a new notebook, the kind with thick pages that feel like fresh starts. I remember setting it beside my keyboard like a little promise to myself. By lunch, I realized the promise was a joke. Greer, my manager, didn't want problem solvers. She wanted a mirror, someone who would reflect her competence back at her. While she stood in meetings like a polished statue and let my work make her look sharp, my job became two things: monthly performance summaries and cover memos for leadership, plus a weekly exposure tracker for a portfolio of energy-linked contracts that our firm had inherited through a messy acquisition. The numbers mattered, sure, but Greer barely looked at them. What she loved was ripping apart anything that wasn't numbers. She'd circle words like notable and replace them with material. She'd cross out we and write the team like it physically pained her to let a sentence sound human. She'd tell me a comma made me look careless. A font choice made me look immature. A heading wasn't executive enough. The first month I tried to learn, I thought, okay, she's intense, but maybe she's sharpening me. The second month, I started documenting everything. I'd save versions. I'd note what she changed. I'd highlight her preferences like I was studying for a final exam. The third month, I realized it wasn't about preferences. It was about control. Greer had this talent for making you feel like you were always 1 inch from embarrassing yourself in front of the whole company. She never raised her voice. That was the part that got under my skin. She would smile, speak softly, and still manage to make you feel like you were standing under fluorescent lights with every flaw on display. "Serafina," she'd say, tapping her pen lightly, "I don't understand how you keep missing these things." Missing what? A phrase she decided she hated that day? A line break she didn't like anymore? A title she approved last week but suddenly found confusing? I'd swallow my pride and fix it. I always fixed it. Quietly, quickly, perfectly. And she always found something else. One Thursday, she handed back my monthly report and cover memo with so much red ink it looked like the pages had been wounded. "This is not what leadership expects," she murmured, "and your tone feels defensive." Defensive. I stared at that word for a long second. My tone was literally her tone, because I'd built the memo using her edits from the last 2 months. I'd copied her phrasing like it was scripture. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say, "I'm not defensive, I'm exhausted." But I knew the rule with Greer. The moment you argued, she'd tilt her head and act concerned, like you were unstable. So I nodded. Okay. She watched me for a beat, like she was waiting for more. For tears, maybe. For pleading. When she didn't get it, she smiled tighter. "Just redo it," she said. "And this time think." That night, I stayed late. The office got quiet in that way that makes every keyboard click sound too loud. The cleaning crew vacuumed around my chair like I was a piece of furniture. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets. My throat felt dry from holding in everything I wanted to say. I opened our shared drive to pull last month's tracker. The energy exposure file was buried in a maze of folders, the kind that only exists when nobody trusts anyone and everyone is hoarding information. I clicked through old project archives, trying to find a clean version of a table, and then I saw a folder that didn't match the naming convention. It wasn't labeled by date or by client code. It was just a name, Greer. My finger hovered over the mouse for a second, like opening it would trigger an alarm, like she'd somehow know. But the folder was there, on the team drive, inside a larger archive, untouched, like it had been forgotten on purpose. I clicked. Inside were older reports, monthly summaries, cover memos, even the same kind of weekly exposure tracker I'd been building, just from years earlier when Greer apparently did the work herself before she got promoted into managing people. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest, because the formatting was pristine. The wording was exactly what she claimed leadership wanted. The structure was clean, confident, and honestly readable. And she'd been tearing me apart for not doing it like this. I scrolled slowly, like my body didn't want my brain to catch up too fast. The deeper I went, the more familiar it looked. The headings she demanded, the phrases she insisted were standard, the kind of language she acted like she'd invented. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt furious, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't make noise because it doesn't need to. I downloaded the files, not to email, not to share, just to keep. Then I opened my current month's report, and with a calmness that surprised me, I rebuilt everything using her old template. Same headings, same style, same phrasing. I even copied a few sentences word for word and swapped the data where it belonged. It felt wrong, but not in a guilty way. It felt like walking into a room where someone had been gaslighting you and finally turning on the lights. The next morning, I printed the report, the memo, and for good measure, 2 of Greer's old cover letters from the folder. I walked to her office with the pages held flat against my chest. My heart wasn't racing. That's what scared me. I felt strangely steady, like my body had finally decided it was done flinching. Greer didn't look up right away. She was typing, nails clicking, her coffee placed perfectly on a coaster as if the desk itself needed to be managed. I waited until she noticed me. She took the pages and flipped through them. At first, her face was neutral, then her mouth tightened. Then she did that little inhale through her nose, the one she always did right before she began. "This is not it," she said softly. "What happened to the format you used last month?" I kept my expression blank. "You didn't like last month's." "I don't like this either," she replied, flipping the pages faster. "This is worse. It's cluttered. The tone is off. It reads like you don't understand the audience." There it was. The performance, the slow knife. She kept going, sentence after sentence, picking at it like she was trying to make it bleed. She didn't mention the numbers once. Not once. She only talked about presentation, tone, structure, and the way a header felt. I listened without interrupting. My hands stayed still in my lap. Inside, though, I could feel my anger turning into something sharper than anger. Because now I knew. She wasn't reviewing my work. She was rewriting my confidence. Finally, she looked up, eyes narrowed in that calm way that always made other people nervous. "What were you thinking when you made these changes?" she asked. The room felt too quiet. Even the air conditioner sounded like it was holding its breath. And in that moment, with her waiting for me to apologize, I realized something else. Greer wasn't afraid of mistakes. Greer was afraid of proof. Quick real-life pause. This part is for me. Some nights I'm editing and I want to quit, but then I see your comments and I keep going. Like, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Okay, continuing. All right, now let me take you back. I looked at her, kept my voice gentle, and said, "I used your old templates." Her eyes flicked, just a tiny movement, but I saw it. The first crack. "What?" she said, like she hadn't heard me. "I found a folder on the shared drive," I continued, still calm. "Older reports, older cover memos, your work." I used the formatting and some of the language, because it seemed like what leadership would expect. The silence after that felt heavy, like it had weight. Greer's pen stopped moving. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't immediately know what to say. I reached into my folder and slid the printouts of her old reports onto her desk, right beside my new version. "Here," I said quietly, "so you can compare." Her face didn't turn red. She didn't explode. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, she stared at the pages like they were a mirror she didn't want to look into. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She picked up the old memo, scanned the first paragraph, then scanned mine. She did it again faster. Like if she moved quickly enough, she could outrun what it meant. Then she set both down and leaned back in her chair. And I watched her try to find a way to keep control without admitting she'd just torn apart her own words. She didn't push the papers back. She didn't throw them away. She just stared, like the words had suddenly turned into evidence. Then she did what Greer always did when she felt cornered. She made it about time. "We don't have space for this," she said, voice clipped but still polite. "Leadership is expecting the packet. Send it." I blinked slowly. "So it's acceptable?" Her eyes flashed, quick and sharp. "It's fine." A second ago, she'd called it cluttered and unreadable. Now it was fine. I kept my face blank, but inside I felt something loosen. Not relief. More like I finally understood the game. Greer didn't need me to be wrong. She needed me to feel wrong. I nodded once. "Okay." I stood, gathered my folder, and walked out without hurrying. My hands were steady, but my pulse thumped in my throat as if my body was trying to catch up to what just happened. I could still feel her stare on my back, like she was measuring how much damage I'd done. At my desk, I sent the report and the cover memo exactly as she ordered. No extra explanation. No apology. No softening sentence to make her look good. Just the packet, clean and on time. A few minutes later, an email came from a senior director in leadership. Short, direct. "Thanks. This reads clearly." I stared at those words until my eyes stung. It wasn't praise. Not really. It was something better. It was confirmation that the problem had never been my work. The rest of that day, Greer avoided me. She stayed in her office with the door slightly open, like she wanted to hear everything but not be seen. When she finally emerged, she walked past my desk without making eye contact. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired because I knew what was coming next. The next week, I opened the shared drive to grab another file and the folder was gone. Not moved, not renamed, gone. My stomach did a slow drop, but I didn't panic. I'd already learned, without planning to, that Greer's instincts were predictable. Control the narrative, erase the trail, make it seem like it never happened. But I had already saved copies to a private folder on my local drive. I'd also printed a few key pages and slipped them into a plain, manila file tucked behind an old notebook. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just enough to protect myself if she tried to twist the story later. I didn't confront her. I didn't mention the missing folder. I just kept working. That's the part people don't understand about quiet revenge. It isn't about winning loudly. It's about letting someone think they still have the power, while you quietly remove their ability to hurt you. Greer went back to her normal routine, like the incident had been a fluke. She criticized my punctuation, my spacing, my wording, but now I had a new strategy. When she demanded changes, I'd say, okay, then I'd use her old language again, every time. The first time after the folder disappeared. She ripped into the memo for 3 straight minutes without breathing, talking about executive tone and audience and professionalism, like she was reading from a script. I stared at her with the same calm expression I used when a storm hit and you realized you couldn't stop it anyway. When she finally paused, I quietly slid a page across her desk. It was her own memo from years earlier, the same phrasing she'd just called sloppy. The silence that followed was almost embarrassing. Not for me, for her. She blinked, then forced a laugh that sounded too light. "Well," she said, "that was a different time." I kept my voice gentle. "Should I rewrite it in my format then?" She stared at me like she wanted to say yes, but she couldn't. Not without admitting what she'd just done. "Send it," she snapped, the first crack of something close to anger. Then she smoothed her face as if snapping had been an accident. "Just send it." I walked out with the papers and felt my hands finally shake, but only after the door closed behind me. Not from fear, from adrenaline, because now Greer knew I had her old work. She didn't know how much. She didn't know where. She didn't know what I'd saved. And people like Greer hate not knowing. The next few weeks turned into a strange little dance. She would critique. I would agree. I would submit the revised version, built from her own past words. She would start to tear it apart. Then she would stop herself mid-sentence. silence, as if she remembered there might be a trap. She'd clear her throat. She'd mumble something about deadlines. She'd sign off. The office around us didn't notice. Coworkers still treated her like she was sharp and demanding, the kind of manager who keeps standards high. They didn't see the way her eyes followed me now, measuring, calculating. One afternoon, I heard her talking in the hallway to a guy from another team, a manager named Knox. He had that smooth confidence some people get when they've, never been publicly embarrassed. I don't know what's going on with Serafina, Greer said softly. Her work has become inconsistent. I'm trying to coach her, but she's resistant. My chest went cold. I didn't step out. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. Knox made a sympathetic noise. That's frustrating. Some people can't handle feedback. Greer sighed like she was burdened by my incompetence. Exactly. I'm documenting everything just in case. You know how it is. Documenting. That word hit like a slap because I knew what she was doing. She wasn't building a record of my mistakes. She was building a story. And if I let her finish writing it, I would lose. That night, I stayed late again, but this time I wasn't fixing a memo. I was building my own protection. I opened every version of every report I'd submitted in the past months. I saved copies of the final documents, the drafts, and the emails with her approvals. I made a separate folder on my local drive labeled with something boring, meeting notes. Then I dropped everything inside. I also started doing something else. For every revision she demanded, I replied with one short email. Confirmed. I will apply the edits you requested. No emotion. No argument. Just confirmation. Then I'd attach the updated draft and in a separate line, I'd write, please confirm approval. It felt like nothing. It felt small, but small things build walls. 2 weeks later, Greer called a team meeting with leadership. Not a big room, but big enough. Greer, me, a senior director named Brooks, a compliance partner named Colette, and Knox, who sat in as if he were there to support her. Greer walked in with a thin smile and a stack of papers. I recognized the stack immediately. My reports, my cover memos. She set them on the table like she was laying down a verdict. Brooks started the meeting. We're here because there have been concerns about reporting consistency and process. Greer, you flagged an issue? Greer nodded with professional sadness. Yes, I've been seeing repeated formatting issues and tone problems. It's creating confusion for leadership, and we can't have that with the exposure tracker. My heart beat once hard. I kept my hands folded. Brooks looked at me. Serafina, what's your perspective? I let a second pass before I spoke, just long enough to seem thoughtful, not defensive. I agree consistency matters, I said. That's why I standardized the format. Greer's eyes narrowed. Standardized it based on what? I met her gaze calmly. Based on prior approved templates. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The way she did when she sensed a trap but couldn't see it yet. Colette, the compliance partner, leaned forward. Do we have documentation for the approval chain? If something is being reported upward, we need a clear trail. Greer jumped in fast. I've been coaching her. I've been giving feedback. But the drafts keep coming in with issues. I nodded slowly, like I was agreeing with the importance of coaching, not her version of events. Then I reached into my folder and placed a thin stack of printouts on the table. Email chains. Each one with Greer's edits requested. Each one with my confirmation. Each one with her reply approving the final draft. I didn't slam them down. I didn't gloat. I just slid them across the table to Colette. Here are the approvals, I said softly. For the past several months, Greer's face froze. Not angry, not embarrassed. Pinned. Knox shifted in his chair, suddenly interested in the ceiling. Brooks flipped through the pages. Greer, these show you approved the final versions. Greer's voice went slightly higher, just barely. I approved them because of deadlines. I can't rewrite everything myself. I kept my tone neutral. That's why I asked for confirmation each time, so we'd be aligned. Colette looked up. And the templates you referenced? I took a breath, slow. They were on the shared drive. Older, approved reports. Greer's eyes flashed again, sharp with panic. Those were archived, outdated. They shouldn't have been used. Colette's expression didn't change. But if they were used before and approved before, that suggests the format itself isn't the core problem. Brooks turned to Greer. So what exactly is the issue here? Greer's mouth opened, closed, opened again. And for the first time, I watched her struggle to keep control of a story that wasn't hers anymore. Because she couldn't say the real problem out loud. She couldn't say, I tried to break her, and she stopped breaking. Greer's throat worked like she was swallowing something sharp. She tried to smile, but the smile didn't land. Brooks closed the email stack and set it neatly on the table, like he was trying to keep the meeting from turning into a spectacle. We're not here to debate tone, he said. We're here to make sure our reporting process is clean, repeatable, and defensible. Greer nodded too fast. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Colette looked at me. From compliance's standpoint, what we need is a clear standard. One template, one approval path. No ambiguity. Can you provide the source templates you used? I can, I said. My voice sounded steady, even to me. I saved the approved versions locally after the shared archive disappeared. Greer's eyes snapped to mine. Local. She hated that word. It meant she couldn't quietly erase things anymore. Brooks frowned slightly. Why did the archive disappear? Greer lifted her hands in a small, innocent gesture. Old folders get cleaned up. We have storage limits. I don't manage that. I didn't correct her. I didn't accuse. I just let the lie sit there. Because lies in a quiet room have a way of sounding louder than truth. Colette turned to Greer. If those were company templates, they should have been preserved. Cleaning them up without process can create risk. Greer's jaw tightened. I wasn't aware they were being used. I looked at Brooks. I mentioned them during a review. When I used the format, Greer approved it. The room went still again. Greer's pen clicked once, a tiny nervous sound, then stopped. Brooks rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Serafina will send Colette the template set she's been using. Colette will validate it. Then the team will formalize it as the standard. Greer, you'll focus your reviews on the numbers and risk commentary, not stylistic preference. Understood? Greer's face held for a second, like she was trying to keep it from cracking. Understood, she said, but the word came out thin. Knox cleared his throat like he wanted to rescue her. So we're aligned then. Brooks didn't look at Knox. We're aligned on process. process, he said, and we're aligned on accountability. The meeting ended without drama. No raised voices. No theatrical ending. Just quiet decisions that shifted power in a way Greer couldn't undo. When everyone stood, Greer gathered her papers too quickly. She didn't look at me. She didn't say a word. She brushed past my shoulder in the doorway, close enough that her perfume hit me like a warning. At my desk, I sent Colette the templates, the approval trails, and a clean, documented process map. Not because I wanted to be helpful, because I wanted there to be no room for Greer to invent a story later. That afternoon, Greer called me into her office. The door clicked shut behind me. She didn't offer a seat. She stood by her desk, arms folded, like she was trying to look bigger than the room. I hope you feel proud, she said softly. I waited, face neutral. She exhaled through her nose. You put me in an impossible position. I kept my voice calm. I followed the approval process. Her eyes narrowed. You're very careful with your words lately. I nodded slightly. I'm trying to be consistent. That made her flinch, just a little. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. You know how this looks, right? You digging up old files. You using past work? Some people might call that questionable. There it was, the threat wrapped in professionalism. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just took a breath and said, if you want, I can forward Colette the original locations I found, along with timestamps. Greer froze. Her mouth parted, then shut. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the faint hum of her computer fan. Finally, she turned away like she'd lost interest. Just get back to work, she said. I walked out without hurrying. My legs felt light, like my body was learning a new kind of freedom. Over the next few weeks, Greer changed. Not in a reflective, improved way. In a contained way. She stopped hovering. She stopped doing surprise desk visits. She stopped leaving vague comments in tracked changes that could be interpreted any way she wanted, but she started doing something else. She started smiling at leadership again, too brightly. She started volunteering to take items offline. She started scheduling side meetings without me, where decisions about my work were made in rooms I wasn't invited into. I noticed because my access started changing. One morning, I tried opening the weekly tracker file and a prompt appeared, request access. I stared at the screen. My hands went cold. The file was mine. I had built it. It was part of my job. Greer had removed me. I didn't march into her office. I didn't confront her. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I opened my local folder and pulled up the full documented set. Then I wrote one email to Brooks and Colette, short and calm. I attempted to access the tracker this morning and found my permissions removed. I want to confirm the intended reporting owner so we stay aligned on compliance expectations. That was it. No accusation. No emotion. Just a small question. Within an hour, Colette replied, copying Brooks. Permissions should match role responsibility. Serafina is required for continuity. Greer, please restore access immediately. Greer restored it within minutes. She didn't speak to me for 2 days after that. She moved through the office like a ghost with sharp edges. Then, on a Monday morning, I got a calendar invite from HR. No subject line beyond check-in. No explanation. My stomach turned. For a second, the old fear tried to crawl back in. The fear Greer had trained into me, that reflex of assuming I must have done something wrong. But I had my folder. I had my approvals. I had my process map. I had proof. So I went to HR partner Hadley, greeted me with a careful smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thanks for coming, she said. This is routine. Routine. Another word people use when they want you to stay calm while they test how much you know. Hadley folded her hands. We're reviewing management practices across operations. There have been some concerns about feedback style and documentation. I'd like to ask about your experience with your manager. I didn't rush. I didn't rant. I didn't make it personal. I spoke like I was describing weather. I received frequent feedback, I said. Often not about the accuracy of the work, but about subjective preferences that changed week to week. I began requesting written approvals to ensure alignment and prevent confusion. Hadley nodded slowly. Do you have examples? I do, I said. Only the relevant ones. I handed over a small packet. Not everything, just enough. The kind of proof that doesn't scream, it simply exists. Hadley read quietly for a long time. She didn't react, but I watched her eyes pause on the same patterns again and again. The repeated contradictions, the shifting demands, the approvals followed by claims of inconsistency. When she looked up, her voice was softer. Thank you, she said. This is helpful. I walked out of HR feeling like the air was different, like I had stepped out of a room where someone had been controlling the lighting and into daylight. A week later, Greer got pulled into a closed-door meeting that lasted most of the afternoon. When she emerged, her face was pale, her smile gone. She didn't come to my desk that day. She didn't come the next day either. On Friday, an email went out to our small team, effective immediately. Greer would be transitioning to a special projects role to support cross-functional priorities. No one said demotion. No one said investigation. Corporate language never does. It just quietly moves people away from the controls. Knox stopped by my desk later that afternoon, looking awkward. So, he said, scratching the back of his neck, guess things got reshuffled. I nodded, eyes on my screen. Seems like it. He hesitated. Greer said you were difficult. I finally looked up at him, calm. I was consistent. Knox stared for a second, then looked away. Right, he muttered and walked off. The following Monday, Brooks called me into his office. I stood in front of his desk, hands folded the way I always did, but my shoulders felt lighter now. He gestured for me to sit. I'm not going to pretend I didn't see signs earlier, he said. I should have asked questions sooner. I didn't comfort him. I didn't absolve him. I just waited. He continued, your tracker has been the cleanest thing that hits my inbox in a long time. I want you to own the reporting standard going forward. Own it. A simple phrase, but it landed in my chest like warmth. I nodded once. Okay. He leaned forward. Also, he said, if you're looking for growth, we have an opening on a broader risk team. Different manager, better visibility. I'm recommending you. you. My throat tightened. I forced my voice to stay even. Thank you. I left his office and walked back to my desk without hurrying. I didn't smile wide. I didn't celebrate. I just sat down and opened my notebook, the one I bought on my first day, the one that had felt like a joke. It didn't feel like a joke anymore. 2 months later, I transferred teams. New desk, new manager, new work that actually used my brain. Greer's name stopped appearing in my inbox. People stopped whispering that she was tough but fair. The last time I saw her was in the lobby, near the security gates. She looked smaller somehow, like the building no longer arranged itself around her. She didn't speak. She just watched me walk past, and I realized the final piece of it. She never hated my reports. She hated that I could prove I was never the problem. Now I want to step out of the story for a minute, because I think people underestimate how damaging this kind of workplace dynamic is. When someone critiques you in ways that keep shifting, it trains your brain to panic. You start over-editing, overthinking. You start doubting what you literally just saw with your own eyes. And the scariest part is how quiet it can be. No screaming, no big blow-ups. Just small comments that stack up until you feel smaller. What changed everything for me was not a confrontation. It was structure, proof, calm confirmation. When you stop arguing and you start documenting, something flips. Not because you're trying to destroy anyone, but because you're protecting your reality. You're saying, I know what happened, I can show what happened. And I'm not going to beg you to believe me. Some people rely on confusion the way they rely on oxygen. They want you unstable. They want you apologizing for things you didn't do. And the moment you become consistent, the moment you stay calm and keep your receipts, they start making mistakes. Because now they can't control the story. That's what quiet revenge is to me. Not drama, not humiliation, just refusing to be rewritten.